welcome you to this last of our afternoon sessions, the last of today's sessions actually, which is going to be presented by Gard Jameson, who really doesn't need an introduction, but I have an interesting little bio on him that describes some of his community activities that perhaps some of you aren't aware of. I can't read the entire list, but I'll start with Gard and his wife, Florence, who is a physician, have been providing a great deal of free medical services, $7 million worth. That's no small potatoes in my opinion. He's been very much involved in quite a number of community activities. He's participated in a number of religious, he associated with a number of religious organizations, especially organizations that deal with multiple religions. He's involved with the mystic movement, describing the epic literature of India, China, and the West. He has taught Asian philosophy at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas for the last 15 years. His current board memberships include the Children's Advisory Alliance, the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada, an interfaith organization, Volunteers in Medicine of Southern Nevada, the Still Point Center for Spiritual Development, the Stanford Center on Longevity, and the Raymond F. Elf Museum of Life. I give you Gard.
Thank you, Ralph. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. During the first week of my classes at the university, I bring in a series of what we call documents of life, otherwise known as fossils. And I tell the students that I like fossils because increasingly I'm becoming one. And it gives us a little bit of perspective when I do this. I have a 50-foot tape, and we show all the geologic periods, 4.5 billion years of Earth history, and we show the Mesozoic and the Archaeozoic and the Cenozoic, and we show that the last 4 inches represent all of hominid history, and that the dust on the end represents all of recorded history. So when we think about the expanse of time just on this planet, let alone the local universe, we realize we're really freshmen. We're really quite young, and as the book says, embryonic souls. And so it's really such a privilege to be an embryonic soul on the planet of Michael. And Ralph, you often allude to that fact, and it's truly the case. And it's even more so a privilege to be associated with the fifth epoch of Revelation. Now, it's really appropriate that Phil Calabrese just did a presentation on free will, because the definition of free will was that you have options, correct? And so
you could have done otherwise.
So Phil wanted me to provide a practical demonstration of how this works, and so I'm going to pass this box of candy around, which is from the chocolate shop next door. And what you recognize is that you have options as this goes around. I don't want you to feel any shame one way or another, but there's enough for everybody, so enjoy the chocolate. And that's just a short way of saying thank you to each and every one of you for being here as the Education Chair of Urantia Foundation. And we're fortunate to have the Education Chair of the Fellowship here as well. It's always a joy when we have fellow educational gatherings and people show up, right, David?
I'm not altogether here. So.
Yeah. And so, again, we want to thank you so much. And the other token of our appreciation, trustees of Urantia Foundation, is to give you a copy of a book called The Hand of God, which is a lovely illustrated book with quotes and images that suggest that perhaps, as Neil says, with the complexity of evolutionary history and of the universe and of the cell, as Ralph pointed out, of a snowflake, as our dear sister Marjorie pointed out. When we look at all these things, we can't help but feel a little bit like the two fleas on the leg of the dog. And as the one flea was talking to the other flea and saying, "Do you really think dog exists?" And so I think really when we look back maybe 100 or 200 years when we're on the mansion worlds and we're considering this conversation about having to provide reasonable criteria for the existence of God, we will laugh heartily and remember that perhaps we were a little bit like those fleas on the leg of the dog. That this is really quite an extraordinary fact that God is the first source and center of all reality. So today we're going to have a little journey in what we call the Cosmogenetic Principle. And as a trained philosopher, this will be a little bit more of a philosophical foray into the scientific realm, talking about what, again, Phil pointed out very clearly, is that all of our journeys into awareness begin with assumptions or axioms. I remember being quite shocked when I entered my sophomore year of high school and taking my course in geometry, and the teacher suggesting that I needed to memorize these axioms in order to do the work of geometry, where I just wanted to prove things. And when I got to my undergraduate degree, one of my purposes was to prove the existence of God. And by the end of my fourth year as an undergraduate, I realized, after reading a little Immanuel Kant and reading a little bit of the Urantia book, that this was quite a futile exercise. But the cosmogenetic principle is a very interesting principle that I learned about from two extraordinary teachers that I had during my PhD years. And what I wanted to provide, because Francis Bacon was the one who said that philosophy that is impractical should be thrown in a trash can. That philosophy in some fashion must make a difference in your life. And so what I want to propose here is I'm going to give you a practice which I will call the autopoetic practice, which is the practice of gratitude. And so we have my friend, Brother David Stendhal Rast, who will give us this exercise. So if you'll take a few deep breaths, and hopefully we'll get this going here.
You think this is just another day in your life? It's not just another day. It's the one day that is given to you today. It's given to you. It's a gift. It's the only gift that you have right now, and the only appropriate response is gratefulness. It should do nothing else but to cultivate that response through the great gift that this unique day is. If you learn to respond as if it were the first day in your life and the very last day, then you will have spent this day very well. Begin by opening your eyes and be surprised that you have eyes you can open. That incredible array of colors that is constantly offered to us for pure enjoyment. Look at the sky. We so rarely look at the sky. We so rarely note how different it is from moment to moment with clouds coming and going. We just think of the weather And even of the weather, we don't think of all the many nuances in weather. We just think of good weather and bad weather. This day, right now, is unique weather. Maybe a kind that will never exactly in that form come again. The formation of clouds in the sky will never be the same that it is right now. Open your eyes, look at that. Look at the faces of people whom you meet. Each one has an incredible story behind their face. A story that you could never fully fathom. Not only their own story, but the story of their ancestors. They all go back so far. And in this present moment, on this day, all the people you meet, all that life from generations and from so many places all over the world, flows together and meets you here like a life-giving water if you only open your heart and drink. Open your heart to the incredible gifts that civilization gives to us. You flip a switch and there is electric light. You turn a faucet and there is warm water and cold water and drinkable water. It's a gift that millions and millions in the world will never experience. So these are just a few of an enormous number of gifts to which we can open your heart. And so I wish you that you will open your heart to all these blessings and let them flow through you, that everyone whom you will meet on this day will be blessed by you. Just by your eyes, by your smile, by your touch, just by your presence. Let the gratefulness overflow into blessing all around you. And then it will really be a good day.
So the suggestion is that if we truly appreciate the patterns of snowflakes, if we truly engage the wonders of the nanomachines within a cell, if we truly expand our awareness to encompass the spectrum of energetic realities from the ultimaton all the way to a master universe, if we really consider deeply the privilege of having free will, that our response, as Brother David said, can't be anything but gratitude. And so when we see the unity of the panorama, again, my friend, the trilobite, he's kind of my totem animal, because for 300 million years, right, he lived on mud, and he was grateful. So if ever I think that the meal is not quite adequate, I just remember the trilobite. And you see the beginning of the quality of seeing, And we know that the seeing at that moment was quite vague and quite difficult, but there was this sort of sensory awareness of the landscape, the world around him. And then we see the beginning of this chordate, this central system, this highway of consciousness this universe of intelligence. And we realize, as Neil says so well, how complex, not just the cell, but putting all those cells together. As Teilhard de Chardin says, we realize that we are part of the body of Christ. And we are grateful for being part of that body. So I want to take you on a little journey which is going to encompass a little philosophy and a little science. And hopefully, in some fashion, bring a few of the dots together of what we've been talking about, tie a few threads together in a way that creates a quality of coherence in our approach to the topic of science and philosophy and religion. So part of my journey as a student was to be blessed by these two amazing people, Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry. How many have heard of Thomas Berry? Raise your hand. Not too many. Thomas Berry is regarded as he was given the name the ecologian of the 20th century. Thomas Berry was one of the, along with Rachel Carson and others, one of the original visionaries around what are we doing to our environment. And we've got to reframe our appreciation of our relationship to the world and the universe around us. And so Thomas Berry is the one who suggests that we're not just an object among the objects of the universe, but that we are a subject in communion with all the subjects of the universe. And his vision was that we would begin to understand our story in relation to what he and Brian Swimme wrote as the universe story. Now, I like to say this is the evolutionary revelation of the universe story, and then we have the epical revelation of the universe story in our hands, which we're so privileged. But Thomas Berry, in his writings, The Dream of the Earth, The Universe Story, and many other texts, sort of laid out a vision of how we might proceed, not just as a human species, but as a species connected to all other species. I always like to say to my class when I lay out the 50-foot tape and I give them fossils and we talk about all of these great periods, I like to ask now, let's see now, how many species of humans are there amongst the known species of animals on the planet? And the answer to that question, Dick, is it'd be one species. We are one. We know of approximately two. That was a trick question. Dick, have another chocolate. We know of approximately 2 million species, and we're just one of those species. And so, you know, as the psalmist says, do we have a stewardship position here, and do we need to take responsibility? So part of what inspired me about Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme is the recognition of that cosmic responsibility that we have, not just to our own species, but to all other species. It was René Descartes that said that dogs do not have subjectivity. When you kick them and they yelp, that's just a mechanistic response, right? There is no subjectivity there. Well, Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme have attempted to flip that on its head. So through their teaching, I have been greatly inspired to appreciate even more deeply the teachings of the Urantia book, which I would suggest to you, there are some amongst us who might suggest that we only need to read the Urantia book. I had that experience when I first got it. I don't know about you, Ralph, but I thought, I don't need any more books. I've got the Urantia book. And lo and behold, if any of you have been to my library, you'll see that didn't quite work out well. Got a lot of books. And all of these books really help to amplify our appreciation of the universe that we live in. So I teach Asian philosophy at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and it's a privilege because I get 25 to 35 kids every semester in each of my classes, and I get to talk to them about not just the theory of philosophy, but also the practice of philosophy, and really the role of philosophy. And so one of my favorite philosophers, of Oxford professor by the name of William Pepperell, who was one of the old-time philosophers. A lot of these new-time philosophers I'm not so intrigued by. because they are very materialistic and there's no kind of sacredness to there's no spark to their writing. But William Pepperell suggests that philosophy is like rowing down a river, and philosophy is, if you will, that river, and either side there's a bank. So on one side there's the bank of knowledge, of facts, of reason, of science, and on the other side of the river there is the bank of values. There is the bank of spirit, there is the bank of soul, there is the bank of God. And that as philosophers, and I again suggest that whether you like it or not, you're all philosophers. Viktor Frankl, we cannot live without meaning, is that we're all moving down that river and we're attempting in some fashion to discern what's on each side of the river. And as Pepperell suggests, and there's a lovely quote by Sir James Jeans, who was a great physicist in the early part of the 20th century, he said, "Science usually advances by a succession of small steps through a fog in which even the most keen-sighted explorer can seldom see more than a few paces ahead. Occasionally the fog lifts, an eminence is gained, and a wider stretch of territory can be surveyed, sometimes with startling results." And that's really what happens when we do, as Marjorie has pointed out, with proper method, we do science correctly. There should be a quality of enchantment. We're told in paper 56 that real cosmological thought engages a quality of curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, and ethical sensitivity. So truth and beauty and goodness. So the true scientist is the one who is really looking with both eyes to see the truth and the beauty and the goodness of all that they survey. And so this is what the philosopher attempts to do. We don't really discover anything of import, but we, in some fashion, as the book tries to say, we try to bring these pieces together, bring the threads together in a meaningful way that leads to a meaningful and wise existence. My father once said, we were having dinner, he said, "Gard, I want to grow up and be a wise old man." And I said, "Dad, 2 out of 3 is not bad." And so hopefully through our process of experience we gain a quality of wisdom. As Phil said, and I think Marjorie also said, that there are no proofs. So go to the bottom of this quote. In the mortal state, nothing can be absolutely proved. Both science and religion are predicated on assumptions. So what we're told in the Urantia book, which is really quite clarifying, this is where for me the fog lifted, when I heard there were 4 actual absolutes of reality. And that these 4 actual absolutes of reality represent the 4 fundamental assumptions of all reality. So matter, mind, spirit, and anybody know the 4th?
Personality.
Yes, which is the gift of the Father. And so we have these 4 absolute realities, which again, I was scratching my head as I took my geometry class. Why do we need to start out with axioms? Well, I think it's because there is so much fog, not only out there, but also in our brains. So the axioms represent a way forward. And what we learn, one of the definitions of religion in the Urantia book, in the religion papers, is that religion is trust and assurance. Trust and assurance. Now think about those 2 words. Trust, we trust the assumption, right? I trust the assumption that there's going to be ground underneath my foot every time I take a step. And I'm given assurance as a result of that experience. Well, the same thing holds true in the realm of religion, right? That when we trust, or as a friend of mine said, you assume the truth and you act upon that assumption. So the Urantia book reveals God as a God of absolute unconditional love. We assume the truth of that reality and we act upon that assumption. Now, Jesus gives us 2 methodologies as to how best to act upon that assumption. Can anybody recall what those 2 methodologies? It's all about method, right, Marjorie? What are those 2 methodologies that Jesus says, if you're assuming that God is unconditional love, here's the methods? Oh, you're about to give a speech on it, so come on.
Service,
And?
love.
Exactly. And we experience true love how? All true,
Giving to others.
all true love is
God.
from.
Receive the divine affection as you bestow it upon your fellows.
Exactly. And so again, the assurance that we have from that first trusting of the assumption comes in what we call the fruits of the Spirit. So even as Jesus is preparing to go to Golgotha for his final act upon this planet as a mortal, he is sharing with his apostles his great joy and telling them, my joy will be in you, even as you love others as I have loved you. And so he's giving them what they need to trust in, and if they do and they follow through on the actions, then the assurance will follow. So whether it's science or religion, the philosopher will tell you it's trust and assurance all the way down the path. So we're told, paper 16, that these three insights were not including personality. Why? Because personality is kind of the conductor, right? It's the orchestra leader. But matter, mind, and spirit, that these three insights of cosmic mind constitute the a priori assumptions which make it possible for man to function as a rational and self-conscious personality in the realms of science, philosophy, and religion. So these, in fact, is suggested are the a priori facilities of mind. And so we have causation, duty, and worship as a priori, like to say, a priori filters of experience. And they represent, if you will, the glasses through which I see matter, through which I experience relations with other mortals, and through which I experience my relationship with divine reality. And they are inherent in human mind. How beautiful is that? So when we ask the question, did God do some planning? It's quite clear that he gave us all of the equipment we needed to make this journey and to do it with joy. So this principle, or this assumption that I'm sharing with you this afternoon, the Cosmogenetic Principle, again, comes from my friends Thomas Berry and Brian Swim as a result of their purview and as a result of the realization that we do not live in a closed system, that we live in an open system. One of the beauties of Indian and Asian philosophy is that they refer to the creation as not as the Big Bang. As Marta will tell you, your metaphors are everything. And so if your metaphor is bang and Big Bang, what do you have in your hand? You've got hand grenades in your hand. And so perhaps in some fashion you are previewing a culture of violence. Well, in India, the Genesis story is regarded as the big blossom. In fact, it's envisioned as a lotus blossom, a movement of energy into the universe, which opens up and keeps opening up, and is an open system in which energy keeps renewing itself. So in India, oftentimes people will say, well, all of these pagan gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, it's all code. It's all a metaphor. Brahma, creator, first source and center. Vishnu, right, is the sustainer of all reality. And Shiva is that aspect of deity, of absolute deity, which constantly renews the creation. So these are the three principles of the cosmogenetic principle. And again, cosmogenesis, you can see how we break it apart. Cosmos we get from Pythagoras, who was a great philosopher in the pre-Socratic period, prior to Socrates, who suggested that we live in an ordered universe. So we live in an ordered universe, and we are constantly in a creative process. So Genesis is not something that happened 4.5 billion years ago on the planet. It's not something that happened in terms of existence, living life, 543 million years ago. It's a constant, ongoing process. And we are part of that cosmogenetic process. And so when we begin to discern the filaments of unity and diversity and autopoiesis, which we'll talk about, we begin to realize that we can do nothing but come with an attitude of gratitude for everything. So, Swim and Barry in the universe story say that the most central of all is our knowledge that in some sense the structures of the universe were aimed at. Very interesting. They don't come outright and talk about God, but they do in the book talk about a basal intentionality associated with all existence. Suggesting some kind of choice, right, Phil, in the whole process. Some kind of, as Neil pointed out, teleological causation. So the big news in my department, in philosophy, is this guy. This guy's name is Antony Flew. How many of you know this name? Antony Flew created a tsunami within all philosophic departments virtually around the planet. Because Antony Flew was the brainiac of England who was the best of the best in terms of arguing against the existence of God. You didn't want to come up against Antony Flew. Copplestone and others would debate him on BBC, and Antony Flew with his theological hardware would shred them. Well, he just wrote a book called There Is a God. And he says, I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that this universe's intricate laws, and I've basically there he's saying, as Neil said, the complexity of these intricate laws have led him to this conclusion. Science spotlights three dimensions of nature that point to God. The first is the fact that nature obeys laws. There are patterns. The second is the dimension of life of intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings, and Ralph illustrated that quite beautifully with his appreciation of the cell, which arose from matter. The third is the very existence of nature, which again, as Neil so eloquently pointed out, the real hard problem, one of the real hard problems is the origin of it all. How did it actually happen? This is really quite a question. And how did it happen in such an explosive manner, right? All the phyla were there 540 million years ago. How did that happen? This is the question. And so Antony Flew and a number of other philosophers are really starting to turn tail. And Antony Flew was famous for, and Neil pointed this out, the principle of falsification. And he basically said the assumption you have to go into life with is that there is no God. And what you have to do now, Ralph, is prove to me that there is a God. And so if you begin with that assumption, guess where you're liable to wind up? With that assumption. And so it's almost a foregone conclusion. And so the principle of falsification was, again, and not really good philosophy, was you've got to prove to me that God exists in order for me to change my assumption. And I think we just made it quite clear that proof is not within the realm of mortal experience. So Antony Flew, and I would suggest Albert Einstein, James Jeans, a number of different very smart individuals came to the conclusion that there is some kind of superior intelligence. Einstein actually talks about it. He says, it's like being a little kid and you walk into a library and what you see are the books all around you. You don't know the language. You don't know how to read them. But the thing you do know is that you're in a library. And so I think part of the bridging mechanism and why the Urantia book, I think, is so extraordinarily important is that for many of these individuals, including Christopher Hutchins and Dawkins and Harris, they have this kind of Roman Greco image of God living on Mount Olympus, doing all kinds of infantile things. It's very anthropomorphic kind of images. And so part of the reason why the foreword in the Urantia book is so extraordinarily important is because the foreword doesn't actually do what a lot of forewords do. It doesn't give us all the terms that need to be defined, very wisely, the revelators give us the most important terms that need definition. So I like to say that, for me, the great revelation of the Urantia book is the first few words. In the minds of mortals, there is great confusion. And it goes on to say about things like deity and divinity and personality. So if we could, and Nigel's been doing great work on this, if we could reform or reset the question of what personality is, if we could begin to reimagine what deity is about, then I think the likes of Sam Harris and Christopher Hutchins and maybe even that poor soul Richard Dawkins might come around. Maybe he needs an NDE or some kind of abduction to get him there. We'll see about that.
It's a little late for Hitchens.
Oh yeah, that's right. Hitchens, he's since passed away. Yeah. But so we see if you begin with a certain assumption, you're liable to wind up at the end of the day with that same assumption. And so what happened to Anthony Flew was he began to investigate the evidence. He began to look at the complexity, the utter complexity of DNA. And he began to see that there's got to be some intelligence behind this. This is not random, that the probabilities of any of this occurring are extraordinarily low as a random function. So Anthony Flew is somebody who I will recommend to you for further investigation. Again, I can tell you in philosophy departments around the country, let alone around the world, there was shock, and he was regarded as a traitor to the cause. And for many, it is a cause. So now I'm going to kind of share with you a little bit of what I do in my philosophy classes, and we'll come back around to the cosmogenetic principle. But I define my classes in terms of two concepts, which you may be familiar with: cosmic consciousness and spiritual perception. Huh? And so we're told on the first page of the book that we're here to do just one thing. Ralph, can you remind us what's the revelation about?
Expand cosmic consciousness and
Enhance spiritual perception. And so I like to tell my students that this is kind of like the two hemispheres of the brain, right? Or the two wings of the butterfly. If the butterfly or the bird really wants to get somewhere, it needs both wings. So if you will, cosmic consciousness gives us this deep appreciation of the cosmogenetic principle as it manifests itself in the world of nature, in the world of the universe, in the world of time and space and causation, and even beyond. And spiritual perception gives us an appreciation of the values by which those worlds function. So that's where we begin our philosophy class, and then I give them a little bit of Calvin. You all know Calvin, that great theologian. "I'm significant," screamed the dust speck. And I like to tell them, and in the first week of the class, I give them a video. We have what we call Red Vine Night. Nigel, you would enjoy this. We bring out the red vines. You know what red vines are? Licorice. Red vines. And we watch movies. And I show them that scene in the Titanic, right? Where the boat is straight up and down. And you remember Leonardo and Kate Winslet, they're on the back of the boat and it's going down. And I tell my students, unfortunately or fortunately, this is the moment you're living in. There has been a Titanic presumption, and it is going down. And so, as Darwin said, it is not to the swiftest nor to the strongest, but it is to those species that are able to adapt that survival is ensured. And so adaptation, which requires cosmic consciousness and spiritual perception. And so this is the period, I tell my students, that we're living in. We're living in the postmodern moment where most people, right, half of that audience there, the UCSD half, right, raise their hand and do, in some fashion, regard themselves as dust specks. And when there is low self-esteem, there's low moral behavior. Anybody noticed? And so I show them this slide, which is Lost in Space. Anybody remember that series when we were growing up as kids? And I asked them the question, do we live in a friendly universe and do you trust the universe? And guess how many hands go up, Carolyn? Maybe one. Kind of trepidatiously, one or two may go up. But most don't trust the universe. So what did we say about science and religion? The first piece is what? Trust. Trust comes before assurance, right? What we've done is we've leapfrogged trust to assurance. We want the assurance without the trust. Huh? And so the first noble truth in Buddhism, right, is that difficulty is the lot of the human condition. And so we have to have a diagnosis before we have a prescription. So what I do with my students is to give them the diagnosis, which is, right, you're all feeling a little lost in space. And I share with them one of my clients. I was a CPA for 30 years. And one of my clients, his father invented the head to a golf club. Imagine this, Mo. And he made $10 million. And he left to his son $10 million when he died. And I look at my students and I say, now, that's got to make you feel pretty good, right, Sue? Got an inheritance of $10 million. And there I am with my client, and it's tax time when we're getting ready to do his taxes. And he said, Gard, let me tell you how it feels. I get up in the morning, and in those days Borders was still around. I go over to Borders, I read the Wall Street Journal, I get my Starbucks, and then I read Barron's, Forbes, and then I go play a little tennis. And then I go have lunch, maybe with a friend, maybe not with a friend. And then in the afternoon I go to the gym and I do my exercise and do my elliptical and all that. And then I go have a little dinner, go home and watch a few episodes of whatever. And then I get up the next day and do it again. He said, you know, I feel, keep your eye on the astronaut, I feel like an astronaut whose line has been clipped and I'm floating away. So again, the diagnosis, right? Is there a quality of discomfort? Is there a lack of trust? And if you can begin to answer that question genuinely and authentically, then there might be some hope, which is the second, third, and fourth noble truth. So I say, you ever feel like this? Mr. Potato Head. Sometimes it can be a little confusing. Anybody here ever been confused? See me after class if you've not, because I have a potato head for you. And I tell them it doesn't need to be quite so confusing. Sit back, we're going to learn a little meditation. We're going to talk about some wonderful traditions. We start in Africa, where the human species, at least according to modern anthropology, started its story out of Africa. We talk about Ubuntu. Anybody know this term, Ubuntu? In African philosophy, this is the term. If you want to know African philosophy, all you need to know is one word, Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am. We exist in a web of interdependence, and we are totally one. And each of us is here and is required to engage in a kind of obligation. We have an obligation not only to ourselves and not only to other members of the species, but to the whole creation. And that is to become exactly what we were intended to be. So cosmic consciousness, again, kind of about our connection to the world of material facts, the world of science, astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics. It reveals our interdependent relationship to the world of material facts, to the world of science. It is, but, let me say this, it's not an intellectual endeavor. It's more than just an intellectual appreciation of biology, of physics, and of astronomy. It is actually the consciousness of divine unity within the splendor of diversity. Such awareness sees. It sees. We're going to talk a lot about seeing this afternoon. It sees the infinite value of all creation and manifests a deep sense of responsibility for the welfare of all. I have some heroes in my story of philosophy. The course I teach is the history of philosophy. We go from Africa all the way to Martin Buber, modern period. But among those heroes is Ralph Waldo Emerson. How many of you have been to Concord, Massachusetts? There are a few things, a few bucket lists in life. You shouldn't leave this planet without seeing Israel, and you shouldn't leave this planet without going to Concord, Massachusetts. Why? Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne and this remarkable group of individuals got together and said, what if we do it differently? What if we do this thing called community based upon truth and beauty and goodness? And by the way, amongst their numbers was a lady named Margaret Fuller. Anybody know this name, Margaret Fuller? You should, because she was the mother of the American feminist movement. Margaret Fuller was the first one to say, I think that the sphere of the woman extends beyond the kitchen. And at one point she was giving a lecture to a group of women, and Ralph Waldo Emerson sat in on the lecture, and he started to opine his great wisdom, which he was a very wise individual. And Margaret Fuller said, and Mr. Emerson didn't seem to realize that they had come to talk to Miss Fuller and not to Mr. Emerson. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his essay Nature, shares something about cosmic consciousness. And again, all of the facts and the laws and the forces that we've talked about this weekend have been fabulous. But really what we're talking about here is a quality of seeing, a quality of consciousness. So in Nature he says, why should we not enjoy an original relation to the universe? The sun shines today also, crossing a bare common, in snow puddles at twilight under a clouded sky, without having any occurrence of special good fortune, I have enjoyed a perfect exhilaration. Exhilaration, joy, bliss. Within these plantations of God, a decorum and a sanctity reign, a perennial festival is dressed, and the guest sees not how he should tire of them in 1,000 years. And so walking around Walden Pond, which is where Emerson lived, and again, I recommend you go in the summertime, and that you not just walk around Walden Pond, but that you take a dip and go into Walden Pond. Is Marilyn here? Yeah, Marilyn went to Concord, Massachusetts, didn't you?
I did, it was wonderful.
And did you go swimming?
No.
No!
Oh, in the rain, you mean?
Yes,
I went swimming in the rain.
yes. It's a beautiful experience.
Heavy rain.
And Henry David Thoreau, right, was there as well. And he wrote a book called Civil Disobedience. And guess who read that book? Mahatma Gandhi. And based upon Henry David Thoreau's book, Mahatma Gandhi did what he did in India. But guess what Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson were reading at the time? The Bhagavad Gita. And guess who went to India to pay a special tribute to Mahatma Gandhi? Martin Luther King. So there's a lineage here. And cosmic consciousness is not just about knowing, if you will, what's in the textbook. Cosmic consciousness is about a quality of seeing and a quality of hearing, as Jesus said. Those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, let them see. He says also, in the woods we return to reason and faith. My head, this is the cosmic consciousness piece, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of universal being circulate through me. I am part and parcel of God. I am a lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. Feel that? When I first read that, it was, you're an eyeball? My wife's very literal. That's kind of gross. but then I read it a few more times, and spent a few more years meditating and began to appreciate. I just spent a week with Jane and John Pletz, who some of you know, at a retreat center in California that was started by this fellow, Paramahansa Yogananda. It was a silent retreat, 5 days. And again, there he's got gardens which somehow resemble, I'm sure in some fashion, in a very crude fashion, the gardens of Urantia. Swans in the lake and turtles and hummingbirds everywhere and flowers just gloriously bursting on all sides in this wonderful kind of amphitheater of a garden. And it was interesting because when you go into the temple there, up on the front of the temple, in the front behind the altar, there are 2 pictures. There is Lord Krishna. Anybody know the other picture? Jesus Christ. And Yogananda says, I was visited, and it became clear to me that Jesus is the master of all the masters. And so in his tradition, it is the appreciation of all the gurus, but the ultimate guru is Jesus. And so Yogananda, in his autobiography of a yogi, says, the unifying light alternated with materializations of form, the metamorphosis revealing the law of cause and effect in creation. An oceanic joy broke upon calm, endless shores of my soul. The Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. A swelling glory within me began to envelop town, continents, the earth, solar, and stellar systems, tenuous nebulae and floating universes. The entire cosmos, gently luminous. Life, a city seen afar at night, glimmered within the infinitude of my being. You get a sense of cosmic consciousness? It ain't just about the textbook. And then the last one is my friend Carl Jung. I took my PhD and the emphasis was in depth psychology, and Carl Jung really rocked my world. In 1972, I got 2 things. I got Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, and I got the Urantia book. And just prior to that, I was contemplating suicide because a friend of mine had been in Vietnam and had had his leg blown off by 3 kids with hand grenades in both hands. His whole battalion died, and he lay in his own pool of blood along with the blood of the children. And it was at that moment I said, and this is the trust and assurance factor, I said, if you are there, I need to know. And what are we told in the Urantia book? This is a law of the universe. Ask, seek, knock. And in that moment, my soul was flooded with infinite bliss and the realization of God's existence, which was not a proof of God's existence, but it was a confirmation of what we're told in paper 102, that of God, the most real of all facts, the most wonderful of all values, you have the right to be most certain. So Jung put it this way. Toward evening, I would fall asleep, and my sleep would last until about midnight. Then I would come to myself and lie awake for about an hour, but in an utterly transformed state. It was as if I were in an ecstasy. I felt as though I were floating in space, as though I were safe in the womb of the universe. Everything around me seemed enchanted. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was. Night after night, I floated in a state of purest bliss, thronged round with images of all creation. This is cosmic consciousness. So part of my reason for coming last, almost last, was to again suggest, as we study science and as we study the intricacy and the complexity and the patterns of the laws and forces of nature, it is incumbent upon each of us as students of the fifth epoch of revelation to do the inner work required to open up that eye of seeing. So, philosophy dares to speak of a cosmos, the premise of order in the universe. The Andromeda Galaxy. We live in a huge galaxy in which all places are alike. This is, according to Albert Einstein, this is what is called the cosmological principle. That whether you're here or you're 100 million light years away, you've still got, right, Dick, the same periodic table, theoretically.
Maybe. Yeah.
This is an assumption. This is an assumption, and this is Einstein's assumption, but you've got these basic elements that, if you will, exist throughout the universe. Now, we students of the Urantia book, we know that there are other dimensions of reality. So perhaps there are other ways of understanding, if you will, the cosmology. But we understand very clearly, and the Urantia book makes this and underscores this, that there is unity within the diversity, and that everything in the universe is about becoming what it was intended to become. This is the word autopoiesis, or self-organization. So, this word, cosmogenetic principle, is marked by three themes: diversity, unity, and autopoiesis. Diversity or differentiation, according to Swim and Barry, from the articulated energy constellations we call the elementary particles and atomic beings, through the radiant structures of the animate world, to the complexities of the galaxy with its planetary systems, we find a universe of unending diversity. Okay? Everybody in on diversity? If you're not, I'll convince you. The worm. Now, I bring up the worm because the worm is very important in all of our existence. As I'm sharing with my students, and I say, okay, we just established that there's how many species of humans, Bob?
1.
You got that right. You get an A on your exam. And of the 2 million species that we're aware of on the planet, of all kinds of animals, how many species of worms do you think there are? I bet you Marjorie knows.
65.
Many.
It's about 500,000 species of worms.
Oh, you were saying species.
500,000 species of worms. And so again, going back to David Stendhal Rast, right? What was the exercise, Marta?
Gratitude.
Gratitude. So how many of you got up this morning? Dave, did you get up this morning thinking about worms and being grateful for worms?
Yes.
Good answer. Good answer. Because we after we got up, we enjoyed breakfast. And who brought us the breakfast? In part. Right? Are we all good with that? Without the worms, breakfast might not have been what it was this morning. Nor lunch, nor, right, tell Jen, even dinner. The worms did what?
Fertilize the soil.
Fertilize the soil.
They make soil.
And it's incredible, right? And so again, if we think about 500,000 species of worms moving through the soil and tilling, and we think really the story is just about us. This was Barry's big emphasis, his big drive was to get us to appreciate it isn't just about you. It's about the whole of creation. So the second principle is unity. And Barry again says, to be is to be related, for relationship is the essence of existence. In the very first instant when the primitive particles rushed forth, every one of them was connected to every other one in the entire universe. For galaxies too, relationships are the fact of existence. The loss of relationship with its consequent alienation is a kind of supreme evil in the universe. Alienation. And this was the primary theme of 19th and 20th century philosophy. Freud, Nietzsche, Marx, all of them were concerned about alienation. And they felt that the causative factor of alienation was, guess what? Religion. And that's why they turned to science, because science was so spectacularly successful in everything that it was doing. And so there was a fellow named Comte, Auguste Comte. Do you know this name, Gaetan?
I heard it.
Yes, he was the father of logical positivism, and he actually created a pantheon of saints in which Laplace and Isaac Newton and others were there, and he called himself the Pope of this pantheon of saints because the new religion was now science. And so we have...
Where did he live?
He lived toward the end of the 19th century. And so we have this appreciation of unity, which we see here, right? Thich Nhat Hanh, his wonderful quote, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." So we have this young man, "See my dress as Muslim, my forehead as Hindu, my chest as Christian, but I am one human." And so one time Gandhi was asked, "What tradition are you?" And he said, "I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, I am a Jew, I am a Taoist, I am a Hindu." Lao Tzu says, it's the labels that get us in trouble. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So the words and the intellectual thoughts that we have are great for communication, but it goes back to a cosmic consciousness, a seeing. So our friend Francis Collins, right? 96%. Now here's the big question for you. I bet you Nigel knows this. So we've got a 96% common DNA relationship with the chimps. Do you know what kind of commonality from a DNA standpoint we have with the banana that the chimp is eating? About 40%. About 40%. So unity, connection with all species, right? Those 4 little letters make us all connected, right, Marjorie? And so the last piece is autopoiesis, self-making. And again, Ilya Prigogine and others, Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize in chemistry around the idea of self-emerging systems, right? And again, what has led some materialists astray is to think that these self-emerging systems are primarily and fundamentally motivated by pure matter and by nothing else. But we see in the universe self-emerging systems. We see that everything is intended to become just what it was intended to become. And so you inspired me, and while we were, forgive me, Phil, while you were lecturing, I found this quote and I put it in. Neil, why don't you read it?
There is original endowment of adaptation in living things and beings. In every living planet or animal cell, in every living organism, material or spiritual, there is an insatiable craving for the attainment of ever-increasing perfection of environmental adjustment, organismal adaptation, and augmented self-realization. These interminable efforts of all living things evidence the existence within them of an innate striving for perfection.
So everything is intended to become exactly what it was intended to become. And so again, as stewards on the planet, our function should not only to be in alignment with the will of God, but to promote the welfare of all beings on the planet, not just human beings, but all beings. And so what we appreciate is these self-emerging systems happen at all levels. And so Margaret Wheatley, anybody know this name, Margaret Wheatley? Done wonderful work around systems and systems theory and how it really functions in organizations. And so what we see now is increasingly organizations are beginning to topple the kings and queens who once ruled organizations, whether they're political, economic, or religious organizations. The kings and queens are sort of, at least metaphorically, getting their heads cut off because people are realizing that it's about self-organizing systems. It's about emergence, self-emergence, and empowering all of the elements of the system to become exactly what they were intended to become. So all of the pieces need to be there in order to create the intended outcome. So we see it in hurricanes and we see it in galaxies. So spiritual perception, very quickly, again, about connecting us to the world of values. Right, Sue, we read the other day, yesterday, about truth, beauty, and goodness, and how we connect to those values and how we begin to see. And so Psalm 1, happy is the person who walks in hand in hand with goodness. Happy is the person who stands near to the beauty of virtue. Happy is the person who sits in the seat of divine truth. It's all about the quest for truth and beauty and goodness. So together, these two pieces, cosmic consciousness, spiritual perception, reveal an outer world of material facts and an inner world of spiritual value. Carl Jung put it this way. He said, so much is at stake. And I tell this to my students. So much is at stake, and so much depends upon the psychological constitution of the modern person. Is he or she capable of resisting the temptation to use their power for the purpose of staging a world conflagration? Does the individual know that he or she is the make-weight that tips the scales? Which again goes back to the idea of supremacy and of cosmic citizenship and of how incredibly valuable each of us is in this process. This is a young lady, my wife and I are involved with schools in Pakistan, believing that, forgive me, Mo, for saying this, but if we teach the young girls, the world will be better. And in Pakistan and Afghanistan, young girls do not have access to education. And so again, when my wife delivers a child, as she did last night, she will always say to the mother and to the family there, if there's family there, congratulations, you have just co-created with God. You have just brought in a child of infinite value, irreplaceable in all eternity. And I hear from the mothers afterwards, you wouldn't believe what your wife did in the birthing room. And then she prays with them. So for me, the greatest revelation of the Urantia book is personality. And we're told that personality is a three-dimensional reality. It consists of length, depth, and breadth. So we want to talk a little bit about that. What does length, breadth, and depth mean in terms of the cosmogenetic principle? This was a bad illustration. If anybody can get me a better illustration, I'll take it. But length, you see, width, or breadth, and depth. So the length has to do with the journey that we're on. As Joseph Campbell said, we're all on a hero's journey. Some of us just don't realize it. We have choices to make. So we're all on this journey. So this is the length of personality. This is the longitudinal dimension of personality. Then the depth has to do with our connection or our communion with that which is most real within us, which we know to be the thought adjuster, the Spirit of Truth, the Holy Spirit. It is our communion with those realities which lead to the assurances and lead to the experience of love and peace and joy, the fruits of the Spirit. And then it is the breadth of our relationships, service, right? Service, which creates the fullness of being a person. And so each of these pieces is absolutely integral, and there is practical application in each one of these dimensions. So as my teacher Thomas Keating says, without a contemplative practice, you're going to live an unhappy life. That's a pretty strong statement, but I believe it's correct. It's my experience and the experience of many people that I know. We had a lady one time who was in our centering prayer group, and for 2 years she was crying. Every time she closed her eyes, she was crying because she had been abused as a child and was in her second abusive marriage, both emotionally and physically. After 2 years, the tears stopped, the cane went away, she walked out of her second marriage. She was strong like bull. This is what it means to find that contemplative depth. So we're living in this moment. It's a moment of great confusion, of great fear, but what we know psychologically is underneath the fear is unconditional love. So if we can push through the fear, we will begin to experience. So it requires for each of us as scientists to take seriously our contemplative journey as well as our intellectual journey, our quest for meaning. To the extent we do that, we will begin to see. So for creatures great to small, there appears to be order. This is from paper 115. And again, Marilyn and I and Carolyn are right now, we're doing a history of the Urantia book, and it's quite a wonderful journey, and I thank Carolyn for allowing me to be part of this process. But what we know in the process is that they were told, the Contact Commission was told, when to italicize and when to capitalize. And so when you see the word unity and diversity capitalized, you know that that teacher son is asking us to open our eyes and to see something significant. And again, part of the issue with modern materialism and atheism is they have very little appreciation of God as absolute. And until that appreciation sinks in, we're in trouble. So the third greatest philosopher in all of Western philosophy, I will say, is Immanuel Kant. And the reason he is because he allowed philosophers and individuals to begin to turn their gaze inward to what's going on inside the human psyche. And he said, two things fill me constantly increasing admiration and awe, the starry heavens and the moral law within. The starry heavens above, the moral law within. Teilhard de Chardin suggests that it's all about seeing. One could say that the whole of life lies in seeing. To be more is to be more united. Unity grows. Unity grows. Namaste. Thank you. So,
Nice, right.
What an ending.
well, you know, it's a very interesting thing. I shared with some of you 2 93-year-olds last week. During the middle of my silent retreat, I was asked to do a memorial service for a 93-year-old friend who for me was a father figure. He was an extraordinary man. And I shared earlier on the NDE his great-granddaughter, who he was raising because the granddaughter didn't quite work out as a mother, and the daughters didn't quite work out, so he raised his granddaughter and his great-granddaughter. So he was a hero in my book. And then I was with another 93-year-old. His name Norman Lear. And we were on the set in Studio 25 at Sony Pictures, and he was beginning a new series at the age of 93. Called One Life at a Time. It'll be on Netflix. Very funny, about Hispanic families, basically All in the Family for Hispanics, and for anybody else that wants to watch. Very good show. But 93, starting a new series. What an illustration of cosmogenesis. Always new beginnings. Bob.
Oh, I just had a question. When you focused on the word trust, could you exchange that for the word faith?
What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that you could.
Yeah, works for me. I think, again, faith, the definition I like is faith is assuming the truth and acting upon that assumption. So in order to assume the truth, you have to have a certain element of trust, right? Or that night, right, after I'd heard the report of my friend in Vietnam, I actually didn't have fully engaged trust, did I? But I asked the question, and I asked it with a lot of tears in my eyes, and with utter sincerity, and the universe responded, which led to the foundations of trust. And so for me, the problem with a lot of our contemporary culture with secularism is that there's a kind of duplicity or disingenuity with respect to their speculations and their conversations. They're not willing to genuinely ask the question, is this real? They're ready to dismiss it without any kind of genuine depth in their inquiry. So again, in paper 56, three constituent elements in real cosmologic thought: curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, and ethical sensitivity. So again, most of the scientists I find who are atheists and materialists, curiosity somehow got snuffed a little bit in the process, right? And so their conclusion, as Anthony Flew says, their conclusion and their starting premise is God does not exist. Because I didn't get my bike that Christmas when I asked for it. Paul.
There was something posted on the internet recently on Facebook that Norman Lear was a Urantia reader.
Yes, we have on our website, Mo put it up there, the interview with Oprah Winfrey, and he was inspired by his wife, Lynn Lear, as a result of his reading of the Urantia book.
Did you say the influence of Anthony Fleur's transition to, actually, I think he said he became a deist, not a theist. Yeah. Did that have any impact on your colleagues at the university? Or?
Not just no, but hell no. Because they realized it's war now. If we lose him, we're in a serious battle here. We need to fight for our lives as atheists. And most of my colleagues, the reason I get to teach Asian philosophy, which is really wonderful, because there are a whole lot of people out there a whole lot smarter than me, but the whole reason I get to teach it because there's a deep spiritual element in it. And none of my fellow philosophers want anything to do with it.
No.
Right?
No. There's no other.
No.
Yeah. They came up with an answer to it, and what he did. They said, well, this is an old man. He's getting scared. He's not going to live much longer.
Yeah.
This is not an intelligent decision he made. This is fear being expressed.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you like that?
Yes.
But then you don't have explanations for people like Charles Towns and John Bacon and people that have been of faith their entire life. Faraday, okay? I mean, they've been in faith their whole life and phenomenal scientists, but I've come upon the same thing. At my university, I took all the philosophy, undergraduate philosophy, totally atheist. The two people that came there that were not atheists and excellent philosophers. I took wonderful classes with them. One of them got recruited to Harvard. You just couldn't, you never could make an inroad there into anything because much like Hutchins and very much like what's going on in Oxford, unfortunately, is, it's like our belief, our faith is, they take it as almost a personal affront to their unbelief. It's just, and it's just you come against a wall. At least I have. I don't know.
Well, I cursed the Urantia book. You know why? Because I took my philosophy of religion class at Stanford, and Professor O'Toole had me rewrite the paper, Is Jesus Moral? 7 times. Because his conclusion going into the paper was Jesus was immoral, if not amoral. And finally, after the 7th writing that Jesus was moral, based on my appreciation of the Urantia book, Professor O'Toole brought me into his office and he said, Jameson, you're wrong, but I'm going to pass you. I said, that's all I want from you. I'm going to get rid of you.
Do your colleagues know what your philosophical position is?
No. Because again, I'm interested in people who are willing. I work in the interfaith world, and I'm interested in people who are willing to have a dialogue. And my colleagues are giving lectures and giving essays on why material reality is the absolute perfect answer to all of our questions. And I realize that there's a kind of dogmatism there that unless I get to know that person, as Jesus said, to gain it, and there's a relationship and they begin to open up, well, maybe there's another option here, that I'm really just sort of hitting my head against the wall.
What about your students? Do they ever ask what you believe?
No. No, but they get a fair dose of spirituality, of yoga, of feng shui, of a number of spiritual disciplines, which by the end of the class, about half to 2/3 of them are kind of changing the direction of their lives.
But they never ask you what you think.
No. David and then Phil?
Well, I'm curious as to your response to something which it's going to sound simplistic the way I put it, but I don't think it is. Beyond the spirituality of what we're saying here, from a purely intellectual point of view, you're very definitive in referring to people as an atheist. I mean, several people have been this way, learned people. And as far as I'm concerned, there's kind of a simple axiom, which is that I can respect intellectually agnosticism, somebody who has not found God, at least in their conscious mind, but can say, I don't know. But when you get right down to it, atheism is just stupid. Because no matter what evidence we ever come across, no matter what you think about the universe being materialistic or mechanistic or not, it's not going to change whether there's a God out there. And if you haven't found God, it's still not going to change whether there's a God out there. And nothing that ever could happen pre or post death could ever prove that there's not a God. And it just, I've asked this with students, and it usually takes 5 seconds, and they say, oh, have you ever been to Hong Kong? No. Do you therefore believe it doesn't exist? Oh, I'm an agnostic. You know, it's so self-evident. So why do people, what's the argument when you can't possibly prove there's no God to say, I'm an atheist?
Well, this is why Nigel's research and the research that has been done this weekend is so valuable, because it expands our perspective. I was a volunteer associate pastor at our church, and I think you know the story, David. I was kicked out, and one of the parishioners got up and said, and I'm sitting there with a friend who's a Jungian analyst. I'm holding her hand, and she's holding mine because we're a little uncertain of what's going on. And he gets up and he says, the problem with Gard,
A lot of us start conversations that way.
I'm quoting you on that first part.
Yeah, okay.
But the problem with Gard is that his perspective is this, and our perspective is this. And I'm turning to Jane, who's my friend, and I'm saying, I think I just got complimented. And this is what I say to my students who will come up and regularly come up, and they'll say, I'm an atheist. I will ask them, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that one either. And again, that's why the forward is so incredibly important, as it discusses physical and mental and spiritual realities, is to sort of set the record straight. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about deity. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about personality. So let's, from the very outset, understand the terminology as we move forward, because this is the confusion in so many of the debates. You've got different, you're not connecting, you're not having a dialogue, you're moving across each other in the conversation, and therefore it's very frustrating to both sides.
Of the students that do disclose that they're atheists, can you discern what their primary reason for being an atheist is?
I think the primary reason is the culture that we live in. Many of my students are night students, and so they work during the day. Many of them come from difficult families. I have everybody read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and then I have them do a meaning paper, which is the most meaningful experience of their life. And last semester I had one gal who wrote, most meaningful thing in my life is my older sister. Both of my parents are meth addicts. So in the culture that many of these people live, they don't see much evidence of God. They don't see much reason to trust. They see the hypocrisy. Again, in the world of interfaith, I had a friend who was in the victim's office for the diocese in our county. And she told me one time, she said, Gard, we have been told very clearly, you will never, ever say I'm sorry. And this was during the period of the pedophilia situation, which I believe is still going on. And again, Catholic Church can't say I'm sorry. Your priest can't say I'm sorry. The bishop can't say I'm sorry. Are you kidding me? What planet are you from? So again, these students see the hypocrisy. They hear what Richard Dawkins is saying. They hear what Bill Mayer is saying, and they go, yeah, you're right. These guys are somewhat hypocritical, and they don't represent religion very well.
Just a quick one, yeah. I was an atheist until about age 20.
Yeah, how many atheists? At one point were atheists in this room. Raise your hand.
Nobody's a youngster.
Yeah, okay. Keep them up. Keep them up.
Very young.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. And frankly, it was because of bad religion. I wasn't brought up with religion. I would walk into a church, I got such creepy feelings that I would leave, and it was that narrow,
Yeah.
this narrowness. So that's, So I had no good example. And if I hadn't found the Urantia book, frankly, I'd be a nice guy, but I'd still probably be an atheist. Because the examples out there for these times, they're not satisfying. So then,
Well, I have waited for years for somebody to ask me as a scientist the question, knowing that I'm a believer, a very fervent believer, and have made no bones about saying I am a follower of Jesus Christ, very publicly. I had waited for somebody to finally, after 35 years, ask me, is there ever been a problem between being a believer and being a scientist? And I was sitting in church next to my cousin, and she finally asked me. I thought, thank you, God. I finally get to speak on that, it was really great. But because, I think, people, they really don't want to engage you in that conversation. For some reason, they really just don't want to, on the science side to the religion, they just don't want to engage you in that conversation. I don't know if it's uncomfortable to them, or they're afraid you're going to flog their, belief or not belief or whatever.
When you look at the debates, and I look at these people, like on Bill Mayer and these other shows, and I see Richard Dawkins comes on, there's no poise. There's a certain anxiety associated with it, and I would suggest that underneath anxiety is fear.
I think
Sue had it, and then Ralph.
It's interesting to contemplate being an atheist, though. It's a pretty simple, clean existence. You're going to die. That's it. So there's a certain peace in that, quite frankly. And it's not that. And I think atheists actually work hard at being atheists to a certain degree, because you have to ignore a lot of this. And so I'm not so sure they don't have, maybe in some cases, a better religion or philosophy than a lot of people who just don't even think about it. I mean, a person who's a real atheist has really worked at being an atheist. And they've given it a lot of thought, for the most part. And so I'm not so sure that's bad. I guess my question is where does the Urantia philosophy lead you? Is it impossible for an atheist to go to heaven? Or to, I wouldn't think so.
you're not punished.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so, because by and large, the atheists I have known have been very kind and very people-oriented, very concerned and very sharing, which is odd.
We actually have on our Interfaith Council the president of the International Humanists Association. And he's an atheist. And he says, the reason I'm here is because you all believe in the golden rule, and so do I.
Yeah.
And I'm here to support it, and I'm here to support you in supporting it. Ralph is next, and then Marcy.
I worked with a colleague of mine for many years. He was a fellow member of my department. I was chair of the department. I worked closely with him. He was an avowed atheist. In fact, he was an evangelical atheist. He every opportunity he had to preach atheism, he did. He would do it at dinner tables. He would do it. He had posted on his door I think it was 12 beliefs of humanism, and he took it seriously. But he was probably the most astute radiologist in the group. He was extremely dedicated to providing the best service he could. He truly epitomized, service. He really did. And I think, as Sue pointed out, he was, I think on the one hand, he was absolutely convinced that what he was doing was, the best. On the other hand, I think he was totally fearful of considering any other avenue. And I think that the same type of attitude exists with many of the scientists that we know. They fear taking off that scientific hat. They feel much more comfortable with the science hat in place and go through life without ever taking it off. But many times, at some point along the way, events will occur to them, like with Francis Collins. As a physician, one of his cancer patients said, "What's next? What's going to happen to me in the future? What is there eternal life?" And Francis had to take off the hat and think about it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Ralph. Martin?
Well, picking up on what Sue and Ralph said, I think that atheism is a core belief. The same as believing in God is a core belief. And I think that in terms of someone shifting that their whole foundation has to shift. And I think sometimes we underestimate the power that changing that core belief can have in someone's worldview. And I think the same thing happens sometimes with people who are religious. I've worked with a lot of people where something horrific has happened, and all of us, they were great believers before, but boy, God didn't show up for them, and it has killed that belief. But it's so deep, and it's so much of the foundation that it's hard to give it up.
Dick?
If we could be on a normal planet and you have your and you have your Adam and Eve there, right? Your Adam and Eve there. Do you think that planet's going to have any atheists?
Probably not.
Maybe.
A lot fewer.
A lot fewer, I would say. Yeah. Trust. There's a lot more trust there. Yeah.
Well, I think atheists can go to heaven because they may be doing the will of God, whether they're conscious of it or not. So that's my answer to that. I want to also say, while I have the floor, that proofs exist relative to premises. Proofs tell us what is implicit in our assumptions. Maybe not obvious, but necessary given those premises. I'll give you an example. Everybody knows what a checkerboard looks like. And imagine you have a set of dominoes. And a domino fits exactly on 2 squares. So the checkerboard has 64 squares, 8 by 8. So you can cover the whole checkerboard with 32 dominoes, right? Now suppose I remove 2 squares on the main diagonal, let's say on the corner. Can I cover the checkerboard with 31 dominoes? That's the theorem. Can you prove it's true or not? I used to give this to my class and send them home with the thought. I'm going to give you the answer unless somebody else gives me the answer. Can you cover a checkerboard in which you've removed 2 squares on the main diagonal, let's say on the opposite corner, with 31 dominoes?
I don't think so. No.
Doesn't sound like it.
I guess yes.
There's a trick here.
Yeah.
Some say yes, some say no. Now I'm going to
What color are the onions?
Why can't you do it? Or
Because
can you?
they're at the corners.
Well, that's not enough of a proof.
Why can't you? Because it's mathematically doesn't add up.
Well, why does it?
Move 2 and it only
Well, there
covers
was
2.
4,
No, I
right?
mean 31 dominoes would cover 62 squares, which is what's left after you remove 2. So why can't you cover the 62 squares with 31 dominoes? The answer is, the proof is that every time you put a domino down, it covers a red and a black square. But you removed either 2 red squares or 2 black squares. So you're always going to have a same number of black and red squares covered. You can never cover the checkerboard because you remove 2 black or 2 red. Ipso facto, you have a proof based upon the assumptions of checkerboard, dominoes, but it wasn't obvious.
Bill, you're a
That's why proofs are good.
I thought it was a trick question, you were gonna say fold the board in half.
No, it's not a trick question. It's a real proof.
You're a great example of why Plato, above the door of his academy, said, "Let nobody enter here who does not know geometry."
Well, I would say just a comment about atheists, being saved or what. It's not a matter of being atheist, it's a matter of faith. And I believe that Jesus said that many, many times. You need to have faith to enter the wisdom, the kingdom of God. So we need to, I guess God only knows how much faith there is in any individual. So maybe just the desire to live eternally, to pass on, is that enough faith for that individual to go on, because he has to respect the free will of that individual. So I would ask a person that is atheist, don't you want to live forever? Would you like to live a second life? If he's, no, I don't want anything to do with that, well, then God will respect that.
Well, following your thought, there were two friends of Marjorie's who one day actually met God. And they were there and they said, "Guess what, buddy? We don't need you anymore. We figured out how to make life." And God said, "Well, that's very interesting. Why don't you tell me how it works?" And they said, "Well, it's really quite simple. What you do is you get a little bit of dirt," and God said, "Dup, dup, dup, that's my dirt. You get your own." Okay. So on that, oh, Bill?
In the university environment, would you say things are getting... over. You've been there how long?
15 years.
Are things getting more humanistic? Would you say? The colleagues are coming in?
I would say they haven't changed. They're as humanistic as they've ever been. Yeah. There's no genuine inquiry into this subject. There are debates, but they're purely intellectual debates. They're not dialogues. So it's just who has the better razor that night. Yeah. Okay, thank you.